Even awesome that I'm getting lots of text messages from all the mums at home or wherever they are just to say that they're here. So welcome to everyone that's online as well. Oh, that's okay. This photo has nothing to do with teacher aids. It's just a really cute photo of my child. But my email's down the bottom there if you need to get in contact with me. So it's sierradisabilityservices@gmail.com. And yeah, I'm going to be talking to you about teacher aids. I actually don't know how to use this. There we go. All right, so I'm a mum to 3 children. Talara lives down here in Brisbane. She's nearly 20. Max is 17 and he lives with me. And Josie is 8. So yes, there's a fair spread, and we always say if Max was the first child, I wouldn't have had any other children because he didn't sleep very well. So they're my 3 beautiful kiddies. And we live in Hervey Bay. So I am head of inclusive learning at the school that I'm at, which is an independent school in Hervey Bay. But my background is a Bachelor of Learning Management, majoring in early childhood specialisation. And I also have done some study in sport and exercise science and childhood development. We're going to start with an inclusion activity. Now, if you've done this before, please just play along. I'm hoping you've got a pen with you and maybe just find a little bit of paper. It just only needs to be small, otherwise Craig can give you a bit of paper here. If you're at home, please play along at home. So what I want you to do is you're going to be drawing, and it doesn't have to be, it's not going to be assessed, it's just going to be a drawing about a symbol that defines inclusion. But I don't want you to talk. I'm watching you, Cass. Okay, so this goes against all my pedagogical practice of collaborative learning. You should be, talking when you're learning, but I'm not going to let you talk, but you can totally peek by looking at the person next to you. So you can look at what they're doing, just don't talk to them. So you can start straight up, because I'm really only going to give you a minute to do this. Okay, so I just want you to put like a symbol, if you're thinking like a logo, how would you define inclusion? If you're brave, you can turn your paper up and show me when you're done. If you don't have paper with you and you're at home, you can just be thinking of a picture in your mind. Doesn't need to be complicated. We've got about 30 seconds to go. Now, how would you draw? How would you define inclusion? After we've done this activity, I've basically split my presentation into 2 parts. First part is kind of the will of inclusion, and the second part is the way. Okay, and yes, this is related to teacher aids. It's the same slideshow for both, but I will talk to you more as parents. Okay. Alrighty. If you're brave, you can show the person next to you, but I'm interested to see what parents do, because I normally do this activity with teachers. So normally, these are the sorts of symbols that I see. There's circles. There's normally something to do with nature, like a tree, or a leaf. There's a hand. Puzzle pieces, something that's connecting. Okay, so that's normally, is anyone nodding? Is anyone looking? Yep, excellent. Okay, so it always kind of astounds me that we draw inclusion in these really beautiful pictures, and no one ever really does these pictures, okay? And I thought, as parents, you guys are on the front line of this, that there might have been some poo emojis around here, right? Okay, so no one draws roller coasters, and no one draws, people pulling their hair out. Okay? But inclusion is messy, all right? Inclusion isn't just that perfect little puzzle piece that fits together. It's not always smiling, happy people in circles. So I'm going to talk to you first about the will, and I know when we talk online, a lot of people say, inclusion is a dirty word now. It's a word that brings up a lot of feelings for parents, because a lot of the time for our families, inclusion hasn't been good. And what I try and say to parents is, well, it wasn't inclusion in the first place. The reason it didn't work is that because it was segregation or it was integration, and it actually wasn't inclusion. Listening to Ruth and Rhonda, listening to the trajectory of her life, gives me such hope, always makes me a bit teary, that those people have gone before us, and we'll keep doing that for the people coming after us. And those kinds of stories are what we need to hold on to. Okay. I want you to try and think about a time that you have been excluded. And we all have, even as adults. It's a horrible feeling. It's so isolating. We don't want that for our children. We want our children to be included. Isolation from exclusion can damage your self-esteem. It can damage your self-worth. It can damage the way that you perceive yourself. And I want you to have a look at the last one. Is just because a school is mainstream or saying, I sent my child to a mainstream school does not mean that it's an inclusive school. Okay, mainstream does not equal inclusion. And that's a really important thing to remember. Okay? I think someone had said before, just because you place a child in a mainstream school, don't just assume that that child is being included. Our schools should be reflective of our communities. If 1 in 5 people have a disability in our community, that's what we should be seeing in schools. Our schools should mirror back to our communities exactly the same kind of replica of diversity that's happening, out in our communities. So we don't just throw our kids in and say they're included, and we also don't assume that our child is being included. These are 2 different diagrams, one on the top and one on the bottom. Okay, often you will see these when we're talking about a way of describing inclusion. And in Australia, I think we are not quite there yet. Okay, we're on our way, and yes, there are possibly some pockets of schools that are really inclusive, but I think a lot of the time we're still sitting in a bit of a integration with little bits of inclusion. I like this diagram because I also think that, yes, it shows, the physical proximity of a child in an environment, but this could also be reflective of someone's mindset. As parents or as teachers, we can have a mindset that's really based in exclusion. We've grown up where people with disabilities were away, and that's the mindset that some people are walking around with. And unfortunately, that's some parents or some teachers' mindsets too. As parents, I think we're walking around and we've been challenged all the time because of our children to have an inclusion mindset. But I always reflect on my own, pregnancy when I was shocked to the core and devastated by the fact that I was going to have a child with a disability. It had nothing to do with her, and it had everything to do with the mindset that I didn't even realise that I was carrying around. So what is inclusion? Well, it is messy at times, and it is reflective of the community. So on the right-hand side, this is extracted from All Means All, Australian Alliance for Inclusion. On the right, and on the left are just my little notes. Inclusion is really around acceptance, and that's been a big thing for us as parents to accept our child's disability. It's about having a growth mindset as both educators and as teachers and as teacher aides. We call them learning assistants in our school. They're not aiding the teacher, they're assisting with the learning. But at the end of the day, inclusion is worth it. It's absolutely worth it. Okay, and it really is about being. You're being inclusive. You're not just doing inclusion. You're not doing inclusion and then you're not doing inclusion. It's a way of being, okay? And I think quite often this happens too, where we think, inclusion's just for a particular type of child or a high-functioning child or, the child that has better speech or whatever. And people probably get frustrated with me online because I push this so hard. But like I say, Australia is not there yet, okay? Australia needs to reduce their classroom sizes. We need to shut down our special schools and bring those specialist teachers in alongside us, regular teachers, to work collaboratively to get the best outcomes for all of our children, no matter what their disability is. At the moment, our issue, I'm on complete soapbox, is around a dual funding model. We haven't got the funds, to make it happen because we have 2 systems working alongside one another. Let's look at how we can bring that together. And that's not making judgment on anyone. That's just trying to push towards all of our children being included. So what it isn't, inclusion, like I said, it's just not a set of practices. I'm not going to give you a magic wand and say, hey, this is what your teacher aides need to do, okay? Because it is going to differ for every child. It isn't neat and tidy. It's not segregating. It's not streaming by ability. Yes, there may be times when children work in groups of similar ability and work in groups of mixed ability. It isn't tokenistic. You're not just doing it because you want to be looking like you're doing it. You're doing it because it is the right thing for the child. And it's there all the time. It's not just some parts of the day and not others. And I really feel like for you guys as parents that there's so many mixed messages, and I'm always amazed by how much you know, and I truly mean that. Like, I come from an education background and I know a lot of this stuff, but I'm still learning. But you guys have to take on so much information, hey? Your mental load is huge, and that worries me, that it's very easy for us to burn out as parents. So, I don't want you to have that load. I want you to be able to be mum and be dad still. There's huge amounts of evidence that inclusion works, okay? Italy closed their special schools and they have never opened it again, and I'm sure it's not easy and I'm sure it is messy, but it is worth it. Okay, there's evidence around language improvement for children just by being around peers who are neurotypical with regular language. Just by listening can help with language. And I'm a big person when it comes to language, and I drive everyone crazy with it. I'm not the word police, but I really truly believe if you challenge yourself with the words that you say, it changes the way that you think and it changes the way that we behave. So I do talk about person first language, about putting someone first before their diagnosis. Teachers are terrible for this. We'll say, take the high kids, we'll take the low kids, there's the ASD kids, there's the ESL kids. It's quick. It's really easy to say it like that. It's much harder to put, the children who have English as second language, So it's often a quick way, and we often kind of categorise kids in a way, because that's kind of how we work, and then we put them all together. But try and think about how you're speaking about your child, and also be aware of those affectionate terms like downsy. Sometimes people will say, call your child a downsy, thinking that's an affectionate term. And maybe you don't have to pull people up all the time about person first language, but probably pull them up on that one. The autism community are claiming their diagnosis. They're going completely the different other way, saying, I am autistic. It's not a handbag of autism I'm carrying around. I am autistic. The reason this is so hard for Down syndrome is because the history of the diagnosis is so negative, okay? And the picture that people have in their mind when you say, my child has Down syndrome, is straight away people have a perception around that. If my daughter grows up and she wants to be known as a Down syndrome woman, I have no issues with that. Okay, and she should have no shame around her diagnosis. Okay, but that's often the reason why this person first language has come about. As I said, language is powerful, and it does influence your thinking. And we don't have to be the word police, but we are trying to think about and be personally correct and not politically correct. We need to also think that how someone talks about themselves with a disability is the most important thing, that us as neurotypical people kind of don't have the right to say how someone should, talk about their disability. So if the child is able to talk about their disability, then that's what you go with. And I'm going to talk about special needs. I really think if there's something we can let go of special needs. You know how there's Colonel Sanders, the secret herbs and spices, whatever, right? That's kind of how I think of special needs. It's like something that is over there that you don't know what it is, and it kind of seems nice, but you don't know the ingredients, and you're forever wondering what it is. Special needs actually makes teachers step away from your child, because they'll say, well, I'm not special needs trained. I don't know what special needs is. It's really ambiguous. It doesn't actually say anything. And it's often a code for segregation when there's the word special placed in front of something. So teachers can say, I'm not special needs trained, and teacher aides can say, oh, I don't have any special needs training. So straight away they're stepping away from your child. And I've gone down there the non-specials. I used to call my big kids the non-specials, because the two older children, When you have a baby that has Down syndrome and people give them a lot of attention and flap over them and, oh, she's so special, came up all the time. And I'm thinking, that didn't happen with my other two. And so in the end, my big kids would be standing there, and I'd just nudge them and what's it like being non-special? So I just, it was a running joke because it kind of happened so much and they were old enough to be able to actually see it for themselves. So I created this table to try and help you. And I know, like I said, you really wanted me to just go, Joel, just tell me how teacher aids work. But if you don't have this as parents, you can't communicate it to the educators that you're working with. And I will be presenting this to the educators too. This stuff is important. This is the code that you need in order to be able to be working with the kids. If you don't go through all this stuff and you're just looking at the strategies all the time, you can just be making more work for yourself. Everyone needs to be on the same page when we're talking about these kinds of things. All our needs are the same. We all have human needs. We have a need to move, to be safe, to be nourished, to be loved. That includes children with disabilities, people with a disability. We actually have the same need. It's not a special need. And the thing that I like about this is that it becomes more of a human need and therefore a human right. Okay? And it's much easier to say it's actually my human right to be learning, to accessing learning. It's my human right to have friends. When you start talking like that to educators and advocating for your child through a human rights perspective, it's so much more powerful. The thing that is different and the thing that is special is how you meet that need. Okay, so just to go, you can read through it, but if we have a need to be mobile or to move, we might meet that need by walking. But we could also meet that need through a walker, through someone carrying us, through a wheelchair, or by accessing a physiotherapist. Okay, does that make sense to you? Yep. All right. I've left a blank one. You could go through these as a bit of an activity at home, just even with your partner or even with your kids' teachers, and really think about this, because it really does set your child up. If the people around them have an equitable way of thinking, it can really set your child up powerfully in the learning environment that they're in. So this slide is really made for teachers, but we already know this. As parents, inclusion makes you feel uncomfortable. And I still have moments with Josie where she'll say something or do something and I get that feeling inside and I just think, oh my gosh, like I still actually can't believe, she's challenged me again. Like she'll do something and I think, oh, I've underestimated you again. And it's such a conviction. Do you get that same feeling? Yeah, it's really hard to describe, but it's an astounding feeling, and we know as parents that inclusion makes us feel uncomfortable because we reflect on what we were like before we had our kids, and we also reflect on the sad reality that our children don't need fixing. They're not broken, but they live in a broken community. It makes me really realise with sadness that the community that you think is nice and inclusive, they're not. Australia is an ableist country. End of story. And yes, there's some great movements and some great things happening, but that processing, that grief that we have, those feelings, they come again and again. I support women a lot who are pregnant and who are consumed with waves of grief over their child. It's frequent, it's ongoing. When you have your child, that wave kind of goes offshore, the tide retreats. But sometimes it creeps back in and it knocks you over like a tidal wave. And you have those moments again where you have to process your child's diagnosis again. So for teachers, I talk to them that, it's fantastic. If you're getting emotional, and I have a lot of teachers that I have to help at school, and they'll come in and they'll be like, oh, I don't know what to do, I don't know what I'm doing, And I'm like, this is good. This is really good, because if you're thinking about it and if it's actually moving you emotionally, that means you're on the right track, because there's no secret code here. It's that continual thinking around inclusion. So I talk to my teachers about them being positively challenged. Their mindsets are changing. And guys, your little boys and girls do change people's hearts and minds. And I promise you that. because I get to see that in the school that I'm in. Teachers who can be really reluctant because they're scared, and they teach kids and they come out just like, wow, you know, they learn so much. All right, so that's the really heavy, the will stuff that I wanted to talk to you about, okay? That's the stuff that I want to make sure that we're on the same page here with, those kinds of things as you move into the way, the things that you can be doing in a school. All right. So the three big things that I talk about are vision, acceptance, and communication. And I wholeheartedly believe that those three things are what makes the difference to your child in a school. I have a saying I like to share a lot online about hold the vision and trust the process. One of the most powerful things you can do is to work with your school through whatever formal ways that you have to think about the vision and the actual long-term vision that you have for your child, and include your teacher and your teacher aides in on this. If you can get teacher aides to come in on IEP meetings, that's really helpful. Quite often teacher aides are the people that hear more and see more and understand things sometimes a little bit more, because they don't have to worry about the teaching and the curriculum and all that, so they're on a different almost wavelength to the teachers. So as much as possible in my school, try and get the learning assistants to have some kind of input into the kids' IEP process. I encourage all of my teachers and my learning assistants to print their IEPs off. They're a living document, and write on them throughout the year. Write what works, what didn't work, because when you come to review it again, you've got that information there. But think about the long-term vision for your child. For me, it's about my daughter being as independent as she possibly can, with support. And it's about her being as successful as she can, with support. And I would like her to have employment. So that's actually on her IEP, and that's been on her IEP since prep. When teachers see that, and they think, oh, that's a bit funny, what it does is it sets that long-term vision, right? And then you just hold the process until you get there. So if you're the year 2 teacher and you know that, you know, we want Josie to be living independently as she can, well, what do you need to do in year 2? What does it look like for the learning assistant in year 2 and the teacher in year 2 to help her to get to that point? All right, and those things are really helpful. Yes, put as many short-term goals down around reading, writing, making friends, emotional regulation, whatever you like, but include a long-term goal as well. It also takes a little bit of pressure off teachers, because you can say you are one stepping stone along the way to that long-term goal. Again, just that shared vision is so important. Some people bring in stakeholders, so might bring in allied health professionals or a child advocate or someone that's working with the family as well around IEPs or around input into school. We often tend to work in silos a little bit, where, like, you know, the physio knows something and the learning assistant knows something and the teacher knows something and the parent knows something. Bring those silos together. You know, get talking, get sharing about the child, because sometimes children can present really differently at school to how they present at home. And probably to give you an example, I like to talk a lot, Josie likes to talk a lot, but she didn't talk. She did not talk at daycare. She went to the same daycare for 2 years. She did not speak there. She did not verbalise at all. And it was only through the fact that I ran a Facebook page, her educators were like, oh my goodness. They said they would never have believed that she could speak. Okay, so she presents very differently at school, or she was presenting very differently at school to home. She's probably a little bit more herself now. So your vision is really important, and ensuring also, you know, with the learning assistants that are working with your children, that they also have a clear vision of what inclusion looks like for your child as well. Okay. Acceptance. We know that our kids aren't broken and that they don't need fixing. We do need to accept as parents that there are gaps. Okay. Our children have an intellectual disability, and it's hard. And it's hard to watch people struggle. It's very hard to watch your own child struggle. Okay, again, that process and that grief, it doesn't stop as you face those realities. And our kids work so hard. And that's sometimes the hardest thing, is that they're working their little hearts out, but they're never quite there. The gaps will stay and they will get wider. Because our children have an intellectual disability, it's their higher order thinking skills that they're going to be tricky. Okay, so the foundation skills are okay, but the analysing, the critiquing, the making quick judgments, that higher thought process is where it gets tricky, which is why our kids are vulnerable, because they can't make quick decisions around their safety and all of those kinds of things as well. It's nobody's fault, it's just how it is. So we need acceptance on both sides, and to be honest, sometimes in situations I've been in, teachers have actually accepted this better than the parents, because the teachers are saying they're just like, you know, they can do this but they can't do this bit, and you know, so we do need to get on board around that. And I am not saying don't presume competence or anything like that, you know, set those standards high, but do know there are going to be things that are really tricky. And communication. I think so many issues in schools and so many problems that we have can just be solved by conversation. Communication to the teacher is really important. You shouldn't be communicating directly to the teacher aide, and the teacher aide shouldn't be communicating directly to you unless the teacher is involved in that. It can be a really quick way to undermine a teacher if you and the teacher aide are just communicating all the time. I know it's really easy when you walk into classrooms and the teacher's busy to grab the teacher aide and maybe, you know, pass on a message here and there, but where possible, always make sure that that communication's going through the right lines, okay? It is up to the teacher to still plan and to still modify, you know, and to still teach your child. They're the highest qualified person in that room, okay? But quite often the lowest qualified person is put with a child with the most extensive disability. So, you know, we do need to make sure that the teacher and the teacher assistant have a really high level of communication, and that's kind of out of your hands. But again, if you send an email and you can, you know, say in there to send on to the learning assistant, or you are allowed to use both their emails in there, those things are really important. Boundaries around communication as well. So again, just probably not texting your teacher assistant, or, you know, says me, I probably do that. You know, it's really important to think about how and what do you want to communicate as well. I'm going to talk about the dreaded communication book. I am not a fan of a communication book. I know it's hard. My child still, she's in year 3, doesn't really come home and tell me much about her day, but where possible, try and use photos. Photos are one of the most powerful things that you can use. So if you do have an iPad that's accessible, that you could send an iPad in and take 4 photos over the day, can often send a much stronger message than a communication book. Because sometimes you put in a communication book things that, you know, the teacher might be communicating something that's not what the parent wants, or vice versa, or it's really time consuming and then the teacher's trying to do it at the end of the day and they can't really think about what the child did. If you just get into that practice of trying to take photos, or using things like Seesaw, which is really valuable. It's online, it's an app. You can, you know, a lot of schools have things like Seesaw now. They're really powerful ways to get communication across. You could set up a fortnightly meeting, including your teacher aide in with that as well. Yeah, and it's hard. I think, again, it also comes back to trust. We have to trust our teaching staff and our educators and our learning assistants that they're doing the right thing. But I think holding them to a daily communication book can just present a whole lot of problems. So some of the barriers, and this is probably more the nitty-gritty of getting into teacher aides here, is around one-to-one aiding. Some of the most fiery conversations I've seen online are around people and parents discussing how much funding their children receive and how much learning assistant time is designated to their child. That is going to differ no matter what state you're in, which system you're in, what year level your child is in, what level they're verified at, what the model is. So in the school that I'm at, we have an inclusive model where, yeah, our money's pooled And we have learning assistants placed in classrooms for a lot of the day. But we don't talk about how much funding a child will get. We don't attach the funding to a child. And I really think we need to just be careful about thinking that support equals teacher aides. Because that's what a lot of people say. How much support does your child get? What they're meaning is how much A time is your child getting. Support for your child can be a program that comes in, a piece of assistive equipment that they might be using, an alteration to the learning environment, some PD for the staff. You know, don't just think that support equals teacher aid. And don't be fooled by the fact that intensive, person next to them, teacher aid, is necessarily the best thing for them. Now, there are some children, because all of our children with Down syndrome are different, who will require really high intensive localised support. And that's okay. But not all of our children, and not all of the time. We need to really think about what we call that Velcro aiding, which we saw in the clip at the beginning of the day. If someone is sitting with your child all day, every day, you are teaching your child to be reliant on somebody else. And unless you're going to step up and be that person for the rest of your child's life, you've got to think about that long-term vision and how that teacher aid interacts with your child. So I call it the fairy godmother approach, where they fly in when they're most needed. They just appear and they do a little bit of magic work and then they fly away. And that's really painful if you're a teacher aide, because it means you're moving all the time. You're coming in, you're assessing, you're moving to that child. They probably just want to sit down. But if you're walking into your child's classroom and then that you can see the staff moving, that's a really positive thing. Fly in, support, fly away. Try like the working schedules that Lindsay showed before, where it has the boxes of things that they're doing. They're really powerful. Again, you can use photos of your child where possible, and that's when building up small increments of independent work and stepping away from that child and then coming back, even if it's for a minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes. Try and build up that gradual release so that your child gets to experience being on their own, being alongside peers, exploring what it feels like not to have an adult with them all the time. My daughter loves adults. She would far prefer to hang out with adults than her own peers. I don't know whether it's come because she's got older brother and sister or because she's bossy, I don't know, and adults listen to her, but kids don't. It'd be very easy to sit next to her all day. But that's not going to help her in the long run. So we need to be aware of that. I also think too, when we talk about one-on-one, our kids are in school for a myriad of reasons. Yes, they're going to learn some academic stuff. Maybe they're not going to learn absolutely everything that they should be, because there's so many other things that they're learning. They can't learn social learning and interactions and emotional regulation just being by themselves at home. There is so much that they learn about life, about being patient, about delayed gratification, and all of those things just by being in a classroom. Okay, so don't get too swept up if you think, I just know they could be learning that a bit more. Use your outside supports to kind of bring that in. All kids can learn really well one-on-one, can't they? Like really, you bring in tutors, but we don't put our neurotypical kids at home with a tutor all day, even though they'll probably learn more. Okay, so we need to kind of think of that for our kids with a disability with Down syndrome as well. They are learning so much just by being a little person in their community. It is okay if your child is being, working one-on-one in a remediation program, doing some, multi-lit or whatever, because all kids are. You walk into any one of my classrooms every single morning, there is reading happening, there's things happening all over the place. Every child is doing that. It's when your child is just isolated and singled out for that's what the issue is. And so the strategies, use your team that's around you now. Again, that's probably for teachers, but think of all the people that are in school that can be working together. Think as parents outside of the school who can be brought in. Think of your team. I know for us we use a lot of volunteers and prac students. Again, modifying curriculum, absolutely you can be working on a different year level curriculum. You can be using a general capabilities side of the Australian curriculum just for your child's program. But the biggest thing and the trickiest thing for our teacher aides is that they're just stuck in this rock and a hard place. They love kids. They want to work with the kids. They probably want to sit and, do so much, and they feel a little bit because of their training, if they're away and they're coming back and forth, that it's actually going against what they've been taught. So again, if you're really strong on that vision for your child and the things that you want and bring them in on that journey with you, then they can be a great advocate for your child. And I love nothing more. I wear the teacher hat and the parent hat at school to sometimes catch glimpses of my child, or teacher aides will come up and say, oh my gosh, you did this today, or a cute little thing. Josie used to run away a lot, so she used to have to wear a little vest thing. We've had whole school lockdowns for her. She ended up wearing a little ribbon on her hat that was a bit more discreet, and this year she decided, she was pulling at it, she didn't want to wear a ribbon anymore, which was like, yay. But saying to the staff, she doesn't want to wear a ribbon, that's her right to do that, and we're all like, oh, because we've got to find her now on the oval, and but it's great to see the learning assistants and the teachers come along and learn with her and see how she is actually becoming more independent and coming to the goal that I want for her. Teacher aides do have to be as discreet as possible as well. They're just in a really tricky spot. They're really valued, but sometimes they must feel a little bit undervalued because we're going to get away from our children or just come in when you're needed. But, I think if you can send letters, send thank you cards to your teachers and to your teacher aides and let them know that what they did made a difference in your child's life, and actually say, thank you for respecting that there's times when they, had to go on their own, and I know that was hard, but it was really worth it. And actually, explicitly spell those things out, because I promise you, again, you'll make such a difference. We read any letter that we get out, we read them at a whole staff thing, and it those things impact. They make a really positive impact. So, I'm completely at the end. So, thank you. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, just come and see me at lunch. Thank you.
Any questions?
Hi, Joel.
Hi, Brett.
It's probably not so much to dealing with learning assist, but it's inclusion in general. So I've had an issue recently with my little Eva, who's done gymnastics for years. Last week I was told by her teacher that I can't deal with Eva, I'm not trained in special needs kids. And I obviously have had an issue with that and rang the gymnastics club, who have had a lot of turnover of staff, and said, I'm not comfortable with that, with your teachers referring to that or having that perception. My child doesn't have special needs. She has boundaries and expectations that need to be put on them. And I said, I'm happy to work with the club and either educate your staff, or our OT is able to come in and help educate your staff. Please let me know what to do. And I basically had nothing back from the club. How would you go about advocating for inclusion?
Isn't advocating tiring? So draining that we even have to do this, That mental load is huge and it's deflating. I think absolutely what you've done is the right thing in just spelling out what you want for your child, how they're describing your child isn't, beneficial, and the supports that you can bring in. So definitely bring in specialists. Josie's speech therapist has come in and spoken to staff right from the word go and talked to them, about how important it is for their role in her life. If you've got people like that that can advocate so it's not just you, I think that would be helpful. Yep. Yeah, you need to just look at how much it's weighing on your child too. And I see this happen in schools where people keep their kids in schools, and I'll just be saying, get out of there. It's detrimental to your child. Go and find somewhere where your child is going to be included. And when your kids are included, you can feel that in schools, and that's possibly the same. So it depends how much you want to push for that and advocate, and I'm sorry you have to do that.
Can I just mention Andrew's about to do a presentation to gymnastics people, okay? And if anyone has any issues with swimming, come and talk to me.
Hi, Dave.
Thanks, Joel, for your presentation. Just a question about break time, playground time, and strategies that you've seen used around including kids, because often that's where negative behaviour happens in playgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like ways that group rooms or strategies or groups that happen during break time.
Sometimes things like structured play are good, where you have a staff member that's allocated something like cricket, and they actually go out with the intention of teaching children how to get along, how to do a structured game, or it could be tag. So having someone on that's actually facilitating a game and the rules, but they're also facilitating the expectations around behaviour and including others, and language that they're using is really helpful. You can also use, again, allied health staff can come on site. There's nothing saying in NDS where that support, is enacted. You can bring people in to perhaps play a game at a particular time. That's probably what I would do. Peer modeling's really good as well. Finding the peers that are going to be, that they're going to do the right thing, and kind of guiding your children that way. Again, it probably comes down to a wider philosophy of the school, doesn't it? Like the culture and around inclusion as well. Yep.
One more question, anyone?
Hi, Jan.
This more in regards of the communication book, because we just introduced it. So now
And that's okay. If you've got a communication book, it's okay.
Yes.
But just have intent and thought about why are you using it. What is that you want to know? Yeah.
Yeah, it's more came from the teacher, I guess.
Yeah. If the teachers are happy to do it,
Yeah.
that's great. A lot of teachers aren't. It's
Okay.
just a very time-poor activity, and it often isn't communicating what you really want for the child. Yeah. Does that answer? Sorry, completely talked over you.
No,
So-
yeah, that was a teacher introducing.
Yeah,
it
yep.
to me.
Look, if they're happy to do it, yep. I think review it as well. Just make sure it's working. Like, don't keep doing something if it's not really working and it's the same kind of, they had a great day or whatever. Like, what is it that you want to know? Is it about what they're learning? Is it the actual topics of learning? Could you ask for a statement or overview for the term of what they're learning? Like,
Yeah, there was something more about the behaviour.
yeah, behaviour.
And we
Yep.
wanted to notice when and where and what.
And sometimes a chart is better, just like a laminated chart
Yes.
that you just pass back and forth between you with permanent marker and a dot. So like a timetable that's laminated, and you just dot when that behaviour is happening, so then you can find the repeating patterns. Is a really quick and easy way to do that. Sometimes with behaviour charts too, I think our kids are included in on a behaviour chart when they're too little, and it's the smiley face and the sad face, and that's, sometimes you're better off to analyse the behaviour as parent and teacher to begin with, and then put a strategy in for the child, if that makes sense. So, yeah, I'm happy to chat to you at lunch.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you once again, Joel,